Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Thursday to all of you. We've got a nice group of people already in. Like Julie's here, Ilana, Cindy, Jack, Nicole, Patricia, Leah. Thanks for joining us. This is a member showcase. And our guest today is Gabrielle Bayme, who has been in the Training, Learning, and Development community for a while. And it's been interesting sort of just watching your journey from afar. You've spoken on TLD casts in the past and have contributed lots in different places. So it's nice that we're finally able to do a member showcase with you, because I do want to learn more about your background and your journey in L&D, and then of course share it with everybody as well. So let's just get started. Everyone, I do have a group of questions. If you look on the bottom of your screen, you'll see an ask a question area. I've got a dozen questions already in there. If you have any questions that you'd like to add, feel free to just drop them in there, or we can or you can put them in chat as well, and I will grab them as I see them. But so welcome everybody, and of course welcome Gabrielle. So let's just start from the very beginning. All right.
Sure.
Yeah, you're currently a CLO, so we've got like a lot to cover, and it all looks so very interesting. But where did your journey into L&D begin?
So I actually started in the performing arts. I was an actor, and I studied theater and undergraduate. And it's interesting because there are so many current and former performing artists who are in the field that I've come across so often. And I went to NYU. I studied theater there, and that's what I'd always wanted to do. And once I started pursuing it professionally, I'm like, I really love performing, but I hate everything else involved with doing this professionally, right? I just didn't like the business of show business very much. It just, every industry has its issues, but that one I'm like, I don't think I'm the right personality for that particular brand of politics and whatnot, right? So by the time I was a senior, I was looking for other things to do, and I did an internship doing community-based theater. So doing workshops at community-based organizations, using theater and the arts as a tool for learning and dialogue and community engagement. And I loved that. I loved the process of designing and facilitating the workshops. I loved the aha moments that you got when you would tap into something that people hadn't considered. And I'm like, wow, I think this is the direction I want to go in. So for several years, I was focused on doing work in the nonprofit sector, working with schools, universities, community-based organizations, doing arts and education. So I was essentially a freelance teaching artist, right? Doing workshops. And during that time, of course, I had a lot of student loan debt. I went to NYU, borrowed most of that. And being a freelance teaching artist in nonprofits in New York City, not the best way to support yourself and pay off student loan debt. So I was always temping on Wall Street. So I was temping at the big banks like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, mostly just answering phones and doing admin stuff. Eventually, they sent me to some corporate trainings, and I had this epiphany. I was like, that's exactly what I'm doing in the nonprofit sector, what the trainers are doing. Only and then I was like, only I think I could be more interesting. I had this little I think I could be less boring thing go through my mind, right? And which was probably a little cocky of me, but it was also the maybe I can do this, right? So I had my temp agency start steering me towards learning and development groups within the organization they were sending me to. Eventually, I got a temp position as a training coordinator at Morgan Stanley. And I kind of went from there. It's very interesting because when I did go to grad school, and when I went to grad school, I was focusing initially on arts and education, but eventually the learning part overtook the arts part.
Mhm.
where arts is kind of a tool, but I was much more interested in the teaching and learning part. And for all of those who are transitioning teachers into the field, I learned instructional design and curriculum design the way teachers do. My big background, I did a lot of work, with those of you who've read, Paolo Freire and, his Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I did a lot of work, political theater work, using theater games and stuff with, if any of you are familiar with Augusto Boal, who does a lot of interactive games and theater stuff, but the way I learned how to construct learning experiences really came more from an educational perspective than like what business people learn in business school, right?
Mhm.
But I feel like it completely was transferable into what I do now, and I'm actually really glad that I learned it that way.
So that acting piece, that theater piece, just helped you stand out, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like to this day, I use what I learned in theater school. I feel that anyone that comes from has an arts education and background, you see things differently. You're able to see that big picture. You're able to um, look at different perspectives, right? Uh, I was in a program at NYU that wasn't just focused on acting. We also did a lot of, we focused on directing and design and dramaturgy and all these things, right? And especially the design courses, when you talk now about like design thinking and how that's become a big thing, I'm like, that's kind of how I've always been operating intuitively, because
Yeah.
that's how we do it in the arts. You do these iterative processes, you consider your audience, you involve the community in what you're doing, at least the type of theater I was doing.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't such a novelty to me. It was
Mhm.
like, for me, some of the new things coming out, I'm like, well, duh, isn't that, oh, I guess everyone doesn't do it that way, all right.
Mhm.
So that's happened to me quite a few times because of that background.
Wow,
So
that's fascinating because I have heard and
yeah.
I've had guests come on that have talked about how taking an improv class has helped
Hmm.
them um, be better trainers.
Yeah.
And I mean, is that something that you would recommend as well?
Oh, completely,
Yeah.
completely. And I think that's the difference between being able to flex, right? So when you're working with people in terms of how they're learning, uh, you might have this plan in place for like, oh, this is what's going to work great for this population, for this problem.
Mhm.
And you might learn new information that you're like, oh, I was totally off. I got to do this completely differently. That ability to flex and the ability to think in the moment, if you're a facilitator, if you're one of the people that are also delivering, um, being able to pick up on the energy of the folks who are in the group and what their needs are. And, if what you had planned out is completely different than the questions they're asking, can you pivot?
Mhm.
Can you just say, you know what, I'm going to throw away the plan. I'm going to go in the other direction. And I'm very comfortable doing that. A lot of the other trainers that I love working with also can do that also have a bit of theater and arts background, right?
Mhm.
On the other hand, at where in my role now, I've been interacting with a lot of vendors that deliver training for our agency, and some of them have been delivering the same course the same way for 20 some years, right? And there's a very big difference working with some of those people where you ask them, hey, I'd like you to focus a little bit more on this, and there's this resistance to flexing at all, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think there's a big contrast between learning professionals that are able to do that or not.
Wow, that is that's actually really interesting, like poignant. I think that I'm gonna have to keep that in mind because I haven't heard that idea of flexing and improv been put together like that. And I do think that you're
Hmm.
absolutely right. That's totally important. So now that I mean, it's so interesting that you've come from like this acting background now that you're a CLO. But what are some things you would wish you had known when you'd started out, like in your career on this journey? Is there anything you can look back on and kind of share with us that you wish you had known back then?
It's so interesting because I feel like I kind of learned everything organically along the way, and that was a good way for me to learn it, right? I think, and again, I right now we're going through a big moment in learning and development because we have this influx of transitioning teachers coming into the field, right? Like it's really astounding. Like it's how many there are, and it's understandable. I for a very brief time considered being a teacher. But I was a freelance. I was a teaching artist in the public school system enough to know that it wouldn't work for me there. I don't do that well with that level of bureaucracy, which is very funny being that I now work in the public sector, but we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later. But it's, people use different terms to mean the same things, right? And I remember when I came from my kind of artsy nonprofit activism background into the corporate world, trying to kind of use that transferable skill set, and I was still using the language of my other world, and people in the business, like people in the corporate sector would look at me like I, had like, purple and green horns or something, because they were like, what the heck are you talking about? And it's really, I wish I knew a little bit, like just how to focus on learning the lingo, right?
Yeah.
So that it's like it's speaking that language, right? Being able to communicate in that language. And I think also like people who are learning this stuff from the educational sector, it's like they use a different language. And also when I first started out, even before I started going and learning and development, but I was doing some other admin jobs to support my other pursuits, it's like when I was in graduate school, if those of you who are coming out of a graduate school program or academia, talking like an academic, right? Like speaking in that like very high level, heady academic language is also kind of like a turnoff for a lot of people that are in the that are in the corporate, world. And so I think that would have helped me a little bit.
How was there a way that how were you able to learn the different types of lingo? I mean, like what sectors have you been in? It sounds like you've
Experience.
been in
So I
academia.
started like arts and education, community-based work. So I did a lot of social justice work. So a lot of like the community activism work. But this is the language from like over 20 years ago, I want to say, because the language of that world is completely different than it was 20 years ago when I was in it, right? And my temp work took me in, like I worked in everything from transportation to advertising, media, a lot of financial services, management consulting. When I was in nonprofits, I worked for some foundations, but mostly for arts organizations. And then, in corporate, it's mostly been financial services. And this is my first transition from the private sector to the public sector. And it feels like a great kind of balance between the nonprofit stuff I used to do and the corporate stuff. It's like, it's not nonprofit, but it's still, the mission is still public service, which kind of feels good to me. I feel it feels a little bit more coming back to my values.
So being in these different sectors and learning the lingo, is it just embedding yourself in it and just trying to pick up on the dialogue, or how is it that you've been able to
talk to people, and for me, it was just experience and making mistakes and just keeping my ears peeled and learning how people were talking about things, and I think it's a lot easier now. So when I made that transition, when I had that training coordinator position, that was over 20 years ago now, probably. Yeah, I'm dating myself. I'm very Gen X, and now with things like TLDC and your Slack group, and there's so many with social media, there's so many easier ways to do it now. So, I mean, just listening to videos and crowdcasts like this of people who are in the sector or area that you want to go into, and listening to how they talk about it, you will pick up on it much faster than I was able to. I had to do it by just, my real life experience and trying to soak it in. But now you can do that, online much, much easier.
Nice. Okay, so now that you're a CLO, and we don't get a lot of CLOs like on our showcases, so it's great to have you here. But for the people that might be curious about this, going from ISD to CLO, which is something we were going to talk about, like what are the differences in your focus? So like, for people that might be curious, like you're a CLO, or people that are interested in working towards being a CLO, like can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And before I go into that, I just want to say that there was a period in my career where I had been a senior instructional designer and facilitator for years, and I felt like I kind of reached a ceiling. Like I couldn't go higher as an instructional designer. But I liked doing instructional design and training, right? And it's like I felt like I had a choice. I could either become much more specialized and start specializing in like one of the authoring tools or gamification or specific topics or whatever, right? Or I could go kind of the manager CLO route. And for a long time, I resisted going the CLO route because I was having fun doing the instructional design and training stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to manage budgets. I don't want to just delegate all the fun stuff. That was kind of my mentality at the time. But then as more years passed, just me staying in that role and being frustrated by where I was coming into the process in terms of the learning thing. So what was happening, I feel like instructional designers are brought in after someone's already made the decision that a training is needed for something. And you're like, here, just make a training on this, whatever, right? And in the field, everyone talks about being an order taker, yada, yada, yada. But it's like someone's already done the needs analysis or skipped the needs analysis, most likely, and decided that a training is needed. And you're asked to produce the training. And I can design a really great, engaging, interactive learning experience training. And I did that for years, but then I kept having there was this little feeling in the back of my, I'm like, I don't think it's making a difference. Like they all like it. I got like all like great scores in the happy sheet, but are they using any of this like after 2 weeks? Is it actually having any impact in how they work and how they do their job? And more I had doubts that it was, and that didn't feel good to me. I felt like I'm spending all of this time and energy working on this stuff that in the grand scheme of things is making no difference. And that did not sit well with me. So I decided I want to get into the conversation earlier. I want to be able to be in conversations about what the problem is we're trying to solve and what's the best approach to solving it. And is it even a training issue? And if it is, like, what are all of the options? Training isn't the only way to help people learn. There are all other ways of doing it. And I wanted to have more decision-making authority in that space. So I after a few more years, I went from that, like, I don't know if I want to leave instructional design, to doing it for a few more years and getting more and more frustrating. It's like, yeah, I gotta leave because I can't do this anymore. I want to be able to feel that the work I'm doing is having an impact. So I started actively, strategically, intentionally going in the CLO route. And I went from instructional designer to training lead to L&D manager to senior L&D experience designer, learning experience designer. And I was kind of in those like middle management roles. And I went really from the last position I had before this was senior learning experience designer. And then I also was a learning and performance advisor for a contract that I did. And those were the last titles and positions I had before CLO. And honestly, it would have taken me more time to get this title and to get this responsibility if I'd stayed in the private sector. Making the transition to public made it possible because and it's very different, right? So the organizations that I had been working with were very, very large, had very embedded or entrenched L&D programs already, where they'd been doing it the same way for many, many years. So me, who I'm always kind of pushing the edge of like, how are things now? What is the most innovative thing we can do that really is going to solve the problem, right? I'm not someone for doing something the way we've always done it. That's not me, right? Yeah. So, that was what I was coming from. But this, I saw the opportunity. I mean, this is a new department. They did not have a learning and development department. They didn't have a CLO. It's a brand new role and a brand new unit within an agency that historically hasn't had anyone focused on the strategy and vision for how to help the organization learn. And for me, having that blank slate, I was like, ooh, that's exciting. Yeah. Like, that's exactly what I was looking for, because over the years, I've been digesting all of these things about what works and what doesn't. And some of what my best lessons and my best learning has come from people who were doing it wrong, right? Who just, it's like, why are you doing it that way? And it's like, you're in your mind, it's like, this doesn't make sense. Why are we doing it? Okay, I have to do this right, but it doesn't make sense. What, and in your mind, you're like, yeah, if it were up to me, this is how I'd be doing it, right? And you have that, you kind of tuck that away. And I had all that tucked away, and I feel like now, oh, I can do those things. It's super, super exciting, right? So, yeah.
So, Gabrielle, do you feel like now you're making that impact? Is that something that you've managed to achieve?
Well, I haven't been here that long. I've been here since February, right? And there is, and until 2 weeks ago, I was a department of one. So I was doing everything, right? But now I have like 3 awesome interns that are helping me. 2 of them are on right now. They're awesome. So shout out to Leah and Jack, who are on the call. Right. And so that's pretty amazing. So I feel like I have set the groundwork to have the kind of impact that I'm hoping to make. And in really what it is, when you get into a role like this, and you've kind of had your head tied behind your back, and you've kind of been like constrained in terms of what you're allowed to do and what's possible, and then you're given like free reign. I mean, I came here, it's like, we don't have anything you do, people are going to love, and it's going to be great. Do what you want, whatever. Having that freedom and that authority, it's like you want to do everything, right? You just are like, you're like, it's like, a kid store, toy store, it's like, ooh, what can I do first? And in kind of trying to hold myself back and prioritize has been one of the biggest struggles. But I have the vision, and we're laying the path. So I'll talk to you in a year, because I'm getting benchmark data to actually see how things are now, that I can actually measure the impact against. So we'll actually have concrete data to see what the impact has been of my initiatives. But again, I've never even been able to do that, because as much as people say, oh, we should be, measuring performance impact and all of those things, who actually does it? Very few of the organizations, none of the organizations I worked for previously do that. Right? Because I think in reality, a lot of large organizations see learning and development as not something necessarily that can help the business in a concrete way, in terms of skills and abilities and focus, but they see it as something that it's like a recruitment thing. It's an image thing. It's about optics. It's about let us look like we have a lot of great training to attract people. Let's,
Mhm.
make it so people say that they have a lot of training options, but whether or not it has an impact is besides the point. We just want to keep people happy and have them not complain about how they're not getting training,
Right.
or how they don't have development options. If they say, oh, we don't have development options, because, oh, but you get training, right? And it becomes more like a, yeah, it's more about optics, right,
Mhm.
than about real impact. And I think that is that that's always one of the challenges, right?
It's exciting. It's it's going to be great to be like, I would love to be able to talk to you a year from now and just sort of see where you're at. But I sort of backing up on that a little bit. I do recall like having a conversation with you, and it did feel like I was hearing there was some frustration about you hitting your ceiling, and
Mm-hmm.
like sort of the direction you were going to go. And I just kind of remember at that time thinking, I wonder if she's going to get out of L&D, if she's going to do something different.
Mm.
Was that something you were considering at all, or?
Oh, I don't know if I would entirely leave the field, because I really, really love
Mhm.
learning and develop. Like, I am an L&D person through and through. I and I have a lot of skills around it. For me, there was a decision at one point: do I want to be an independent consultant,
Mm,
right? And it's like, and I don't want to spend that much of my time selling and trying to get work. I just want to do the work, and
mhm.
I made that decision. Um, yeah, I probably entertained the idea, but there
Yeah.
isn't anything that really I was like, this is what
Yeah.
I want to do. I
Yeah.
feel like there's so many options in L&D. It was more like, what industry, what environment do I
Mhm.
want to do it in, rather
Mhm.
than if I want to do it. And
Yeah.
I think for me, the change I needed was that shift to public sector,
Mhm.
right? And that, I feel like, it's so different that it feels very different. Let's just
Right.
put it
No,
that
that's helpful too, and I'm glad that Kim heard that too. Like, she mentioned in chat that she thought that as well. And so now that you're where you're at as a CLO, what are you finding? What are the biggest challenges for you at this point?
way. I definitely think just the assumptions people have about what a learning function does, and
Mhm.
the predominantly um, most popular view is that it's about training, it's about courses and content, right? And I'm trying to broaden the perspective of that, right? But also, when it's kind of scope in the prioritizing. I feel like I'm constantly having to tame my, ooh, what I want to do next with the, okay, but what is really needed most, and what's going to have the most impact the most quickly. And I feel like every day I have to be reminding myself to let that be what's guiding me. Whereas before, when you're an instructional designer or a manager, you're generally assigned projects or tasks, and you just execute on those, right? And usually you might have a few when you prioritize within them, but I'm trying to prioritize like big initiatives. Like, what am I focusing on first? And also, having to learn a lot when you're a department of one. I mean, what was interesting is that my first big initiative here isn't a training solution or a learning solution. Even, it is a knowledge base. It
Mhm.
is a hub where all of the existing institutional knowledge, all of the current resources, training, documentation, all of that can reside in one place, because they didn't have that. And that
Mhm.
was causing all kinds of issues, because there was stuff they had that people didn't even know about. And I feel like that's something that came up in also the last contract job I did, is that uh, companies are really bad at knowledge management generally, and that
Mhm.
causes a lot of issues. That often people are like, oh, they need more training. It's like, no, they just need to be able to access the information they need easily and more quickly, right?
Mhm.
That would do a huge thing to helping their performance, rather than starting with training, right? So we've been laying down that network. I've built a whole environment on SharePoint, and it's, yeah, we're going through all the existing stuff. We're going to be filling in stuff that doesn't exist. We're going to be creating more options. But that first thing, I'm like, wow, I'm really doing the job right now of like, an information officer or a knowledge, someone who works in knowledge management rather than L&D right now, because the organization, we don't have someone who focuses on knowledge management, right? So that was really interesting for me, but it was such a glaring, clear need that it's like, we need this. This is what has to happen first. That was something that became very, very clear to me.
Wow, Gabrielle, it's so, you just seem so innovative and really ambitious. And I've only got a couple questions left to ask right now. So,
yeah. I see Kim ask curating in what way. So what we're doing is I have these folders of thousands of existing documents and presentations and videos from different task forces within the agency, and trying to go through that and organize it and make sense of it and find out what is crucial and helpful, particularly to people like new hires, right? So we're curating from that, and a lot of that has to be redone because I don't know. I mean, different organizations have different bad habits in terms of their knowledge. This particular organization, their bad habit is, first of all, everything is a PowerPoint, whether or not it makes sense, right? Or it's a long, long, long manual, right? And let's be honest, no one's going to read all that. Nobody's going to look for a simple answer in a 65-page manual. Nobody's going to do that, right? And so it's kind of like, okay, can we pick out the stuff that's actually important out of these massive, massive documents and files, right? So that's one thing, but also curating from other places like LinkedIn Learning, YouTube, TikTok has some of the best like Excel how-to stuff out there, wherever we have, or I'm looking at all kinds of different sources, and we're trying to pull that together. And in the biggest thing I feel like I am is like L&D is going to be is like a filter of getting what's important and like cutting out all the noise, of the noise that exists in all of the other resources that they have.
Wow. No, I totally agree. How fascinating. Now, the one point that I kind of want to wrap up with that you had mentioned, because you had talked about going from ISD to CLO and then going from training to performance. Can you just talk about that a little bit as we close?
Yeah, and I think that actually that was what helped me decide to stay in learning and development. Because when I reached that ceiling and I felt like I wasn't having an impact, it's like, okay, well, does learning and development just not have an impact on organizations? But then, I feel like there's this little, it's almost like a secret club or subgroup of people in L&D that are, I don't know if you want to call them performance focused or focused on the performance consulting side of things, and have this philosophy that you should start with dissecting the problem and be very clear on what the outcome is and design towards that outcome. Very task-based, focusing on, resources before courses, curation before creation, all these things you hear, right? But saying, okay, if we can analyze what the root causes are to these problems, there's actually a method and methodology where can we assess what is the best type of solution? What really is a training solution where people just don't know how to do something, they need the skills, or they know how to do it, but they don't get enough practice, so they're not good at it. So how can we help them practice or whatever? Or, okay, no, there's an issue around motivation. There's an issue that they don't have the right systems or tools to do this. And it's like, okay, it's like I can eliminate the stuff where I was wasting my time because it's not a training problem, right? Like there's a way to get at the stuff where learning solutions really can have an impact. And I do think learning solutions can have an impact where you're clear that that's what the need is. And so when I learned and started learning more about that process, I was like, yes, there is a way where what I'm doing can make a difference, and that's how I want to work. That's how I want to work. And that the struggle was, in the middle manager roles I was in, it's like I was in organizations where, well, they've been doing it the same way for a long time. So like I wanted to like dig in and do kind of long-term projects where I really dug into the root causes and was able to do like a longer kind of consulting process with my internal clients but really they just wanted me to just make training courses, and there was this, I'm like, okay, this isn't, I need to find a different role or a different place to do this.
I love it. Oh my gosh, Gabrielle, you're so passionate about this. I feel like it would be just great to meet up and be able to talk to you. I'm sure like a group of us, we would just get so much.
I would love to. I would love to
hear you talk about this. It's so wonderful.
Yep.
I got to wrap it up though, but I thank you so much for doing this showcase.
Thank
and
you.
I want to say, even with your interns, if they want to come in, I'd love to hear like what how you motivate them and are probably mentoring them at this point, because I'm sure interning for you is just going to be a great adventure for them.
I hope so. I try to make it interesting, but let me tell you, this is not a typical internship for them. They're not just doing like busy work and grunt work. They're like doing the heavy lifting, and they're doing an awesome job at it. So I'm very, very happy. But I just want to say also, anyone who wants to further have a conversation, I've been looking for people to discuss all this performance stuff with online. I feel like I feel like most of the L&D groups are instructional design focused. And I really want to find a community where people are talking about the performance stuff. And also, I have a lot of advice for transitioning teachers. So if anyone wants to, get together, pick my brain on that, I'd be happy to.
Oh, I love it. There's so many folks that are looking for advice from somebody like you. And do you read like Bob Mosher and Conrad Gottfriedson and all?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm big fans of them. 5 Moments of Need. Big, huge Kathy Moore fan. Also, Nick Shackleton Jones stuff is really, really helpful about the difference between education and learning. So yeah, there's a lot of people who've really influenced me. But
great, yeah, because I know Bob and Con had a community going. I don't know if it's still around.
I'm part of that, but it's been really. I looked at the other day, and the last comment was from something I wrote last September. So it's just not very active.
All right.
So I'm looking for something that's a little more active.
Right. Okay. So interesting. Gabrielle, thank you so much. Thanks for doing this today. And everyone, thanks for joining. I want to remind you, we have AIDC 22 coming up next week. That's the Accessible and Inclusive Design Conference. I just checked. We have like over 600 people registered for it already. It's free. So make sure you sign up. You can go to theaidc.com to register. The program is complete. It's looking absolutely wonderful. And so I think that's going to be another great event that TLDC has the pleasure of hosting. So hopefully we'll see everybody in that one. And with that, thanks again, Gabrielle. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.